Hi there, folks. So today I want to talk about somebody who in the UK is probably best known as a radio and television presenter, but has also been a prolific writer of novels and non-fiction. And as well as talking about his career, I'm going to be talking about some of his books. I've got 3 fiction books and 2 non-fiction books. And I am talking about Melvyn Bragg. Melvyn Bragg was born in 1939 in Carlisle, the son of pub landlords, working class, and got himself through the grammar school system into university and became one of our most erudite broadcasters and writers. He always wanted to write, but knowing that writing career isn't always going to be one that's going to bring in huge income, he started working for the BBC in the early 1960s. He started working on the BBC World Service on the radio and then moved into television, including presenting a programme on books called Read All About It in the 1970s, various arts programmes, and then famously he became the presenter of the South Bank Show from 1978 to 2010. I used to watch the South Bank Show now and then. I think it was on very late, so I sometimes worked in the evening, so I didn't always catch it. But the South Bank Show was an arts programme, one of those sort of magazine programmes with interviews and discussions about the arts, and it was absolutely brilliant. I'm gonna talk about his books in a minute, but I have to talk about one of the best television interviews I have ever seen. In 1994, he interviewed the playwright Dennis Potter at a time when Dennis Potter was dying of pancreatic cancer. Dennis Potter, for those of you who don't know, was a brilliant playwright who wrote television plays such as Pennies from Heaven and The Singing Detective, both of which I watched and are absolutely brilliant. And Melvyn Bragg's interview with Dennis Potter was one of the most moving, honest, just amazing interviews I've ever seen on television. I actually recorded it. Sadly, of course, at the time it was on a videotape, which I could no longer use shortly after that. But if you ever get the chance to see Melvyn Bragg's interview with Dennis Potter, do watch it. It's incredibly moving. I mean, it may have been especially poignant for me because 1994 was the year that my father died, and the interview must have been around that time. So it was probably especially moving for me because my father had really loved Dennis Potter's plays. Do have a look for that interview if you've never seen it before. So back to Melvyn Bragg. He's won many awards and honours: British Academy of Film and Television Arts, Dimbleby Award in 1986, Best New Radio Series for the Roots of English in 2000. He has an honorary degree from the Open University, the South Bank Show Lifetime Achievement Award in 2010. He's also been president of, or still is, I believe, president of the National Campaign for the Arts. Just reading off a few of his positions: Chancellor of the University of Leeds, Honorary Fellowship of the British Academy, Honorary Doctorate of Literature, University College London, President of the National Academy of Writing, Vice President of the Friends of the British Library, Chairman of the Arts Council Literature Panel. just an amazing career. And looking now at his writing, there's a long list of novels, of which I've read 3, and I'm going to be talking about those in a minute. And also a pretty long list of non-fiction books, including some biographies. And he's also been involved with some screenwriting as well. So an extraordinary career and a really good writer. So this is why he is in my A to Z of writers from my bookshelf. Of course, I can't go any further without having Tilly come to say hello. Yep, there you It seems to be her way of greeting, is doing a big yawn. There you go. Yeah. All right, you've said hello now. There we go. Bragg's first novel was called For Want of a Nail, which I haven't read, published in 1965, basically about a young man coming to terms with his identity. All right there, yeah. His second novel was called The Second Inheritance, and this was published in 1966. So I'm just going to read to you the premise. I read this quite some time ago. Basically, the theme is it's about class, the relationship of two very different families within the same landscape. In the shadow of Hadrian's Wall, very close to where Melvyn Bragg grew up, obviously. In the shadow of Hadrian's Wall, 2 young men chafe at the constraints of rural life and yearn to break free from the courses set for them. John Foster, driven hard by his tyrannical, ambitious father on their tenant farm, and Arthur Langley, reluctant inheritor of his father's waning estate. Though class has long kept their neighbouring families apart, the pair form an intense friendship until John makes the mistake of falling for Arthur's mercurial sister. So it's very much about the kind of separation of the classes and what happens when they come together in friendship and in relationships. Writing at that time, the class system was still kind of there. So it's kind of probably very much of its time. When you look at reviews on places like Goodreads, they're a little bit mixed. Criticisms of it have been that it doesn't quite know where it's going and it's a little bit depressing. But from the reviews on the back of the book, obviously they're going to be good ones, London Evening Standard said this is a novel which has something to say and which says it well and truthfully. She magazine said a deep, moody masterpiece of atmosphere and character. I cannot remember really what I thought about this book. You know, when you read so many books in a lifetime, sometimes you just don't remember reading some of the books you've read early on, and I just don't remember this, but that maybe says something. It was his second book, probably not quite as good as some of his later books, but possibly worth giving it a go. That's The Second Inheritance. Moving forward now to another novel much later, published in 1996, is Credo, and I don't have a copy of this. Again, I read it some time ago. This time it has stayed with me in my memory because I found the historical part of it so very interesting. It's set in the Dark Ages, quite an unusual historical setting for novels because it's quite a difficult period to write about, as we know so little. But it's about the young Celtic princess called St. Vega, who was a saint in Northumbria and according to legend was an Irish princess who fled to England to escape an arranged marriage to a Viking prince. Vowing to be celibate for the rest of her life, she founds a nunnery in Northumbria. And part of the book that I found really interesting was the bit that centres around the Synod of Whitby, which was a Christian administrative gathering which ruled when the Christian calendar would include Easter and break away from Roman custom. Very, very fascinating, extremely well researched. So includes this kind of rather mythical figure of St. Bega, along with the historical fact of the Synod of Whitby, which is really fascinating. It's a very long book. So, and I know with some critics have said it's a bit heavy going, but I really enjoyed it. I found it just really, really interesting. So if you're interested in historical novels set in that period, in the Dark Ages, obviously very much fictionalized, but very interesting for its historical background as well. So Credo. And I'm going to talk about his two of his non-fiction books in a minute, but the other novel that I've read is The Soldier's Return, which was published in 1999. The Soldier's Return, I do remember this fairly well. It's about a soldier who returns at the end of World War II from the war in Burma, which, of course, after 1945, the war in the East did go on until 1946. And he returns in 1946 to a town in Cumbria. Obviously, again, near where Melvyn Bragg grew up. The town he comes back to has not changed, but he has. And not only that, but his wife has discovered a new feeling of independence from, of course, the wartime jobs that she did. And his son, of course, hardly knows him. And he has to try and forge a new relationship with them. And, of course, it's a brilliant theme because this happened so often with soldiers returning from the war, probably in both world wars, both World War One and World War Two. And so it's a very interesting premise to explore those difficulties that happened where soldiers were changed from the awful experiences that they had gone through. And of course, the women in both wars had discovered a feeling of independence and kind of empowerment, really, through their own wartime job experiences. And of course, having to forge relationships with children that had not seen them hardly for 6 years. So one of the reviews actually compares it to Sebastian Falk's book of the First World War, Birdsong, which is high praise indeed, because I've read that and it's one of the best wartime books I've ever read. Beryl Bainbridge in The Independent called it unsentimental, truthful and wonderful. DJ Taylor in the literary review said sympathetic, touching, infinitely believable. This is a highly accomplished novel. So yeah, I think it seems to be that his writing has obviously improved and over the years. So I think this is probably a much more readable book than perhaps his earlier books, including The Second Inheritance. But I think all of his books are highly sensitive, moving, and have extremely human themes and messages about human relationships, classes, the effects of war, and also, of course, there are the historical novels as well. So, well worth having a look at. And I just want to now talk about two non-fiction books that I have really enjoyed of Melvyn Bragg's. And the first of these is his biography of Richard Burton. And it's Rich, The Life of Richard Burton. I so enjoyed it. I think it's one of the best biographies I've ever read. So interesting. Such an interesting man Richard Burton was. And Melvyn Bragg had many meetings with people that Richard Burton knew, from his childhood in Wales to his obvious film career, etc. And it's such a brilliant insight into this very, very complex man. And of course, all his well-known relationships, particularly with Elizabeth Taylor. And talking about Richard Burton, if you've only ever seen him in film, try and see if you can find his recording of the play Under Milk Wood. The beautiful language of Dylan Thomas, so beautifully read by Richard Burton, a true Welshman. The beautiful language of, it's another book I want to, a play that I'd love to talk about sometime, Under Milk Wood. It's the language so beautifully rendered by Richard Burton. But anyway, Melvyn Bragg's biography of Richard Burton. If you haven't read that and you're interested in Richard Burton's life at all, I absolutely recommend this biography. And lastly, another of his non-fiction books, which I absolutely loved and bought for me one Christmas by my sister-in-law's mother. And I had not come across this before, and I was really surprised and touched by her knowing that I would enjoy this. It's called The Adventure of English, the biography of a language. It's basically, as you might tell from the title, it's the history of the English language. Does that sound a little dry to you? Think again. It's so interesting. I thoroughly enjoyed this. It's not quite like reading a non-fiction book. It was like reading an engaging story. The way it's written, and it calls itself a biography of a language, and it is a little more like reading a biography. And he tells the story of the English language right through from its Germanic origins through the Anglo-Saxons, and the elements that has come into the English language, the Latin, French, Spanish, Italian, Arabic, Hindi, etc., and how the language has evolved through the continuing immigration of peoples into England. And it's then absolutely fascinating, not just a story of a language, but a story of the people of the United Kingdom. And one thing it really kind of taught me, I mean, I was always a bit of a stickler for grammar and, making sure words are spelt properly, or, the right words are used at the right time. But one of the things this book made me realise is that language, living language, is constantly changing. So we shouldn't worry too much when, words and syntax change over time. And of course, there's a chapter towards the end where he talks about the way language is changing in the computer age. But, that's what happens. This is, language, living language is change. That is the nature of language. And the language that was used in Anglo-Saxon times, we would barely recognise today at all. Absolutely fascinating read. Not dry at all. Some of the reviews, always readable, often thought-provoking and consistently entertaining. That was what the Independent said. I totally agree with that. And the Sunday Times said, intriguing. I share Bragg's linguistic egalitarianism, his respect for dialects, his sense of the expressive richness that borrowed words bring. And the Spectator said, told as an adventure story, and rightly so. There is much splendid intellectual firepower in this book. If you're at all interested in the way languages evolve, you would really, really love this book. It's absolutely fascinating. And it was published, by the way, in 2003. So there we go. That is my little discussion on wonderful, intelligent, intellectual man, broadcaster, presenter, writer, extraordinaire, Melvyn Bragg. If you've not read any of his stuff before, then I do recommend certainly trying out some of his books, both fiction and non-fiction. So that's that. I'll be coming up with another B from my A to Z of authors from my bookshelf in maybe a few weeks' time. In the meantime, what I'm thinking of next, we've got the Olympics coming up, and I love the Olympics. And so I was thinking, I don't have many books about sport, but I was thinking of maybe something inspirational, some inspirational books that might be lovely to read during the Olympic period. So if you have any ideas, do let me know. I might include them, but I'll be sorting a few books out from my bookshelf as well. If you want to look back and see some of my previous A to Zs, then one of them will be coming up here. And that's it for now, I think. Make sure that you are subscribed and do leave me any comments you want about Melvyn Bragg, his books and life, etc. And I will see you again very shortly. Bye for now.